A single mother worked as a maid and ended up awakening the love of her millionaire boss. Before the story begins, comment below where you're watching from. And if you enjoy love stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way, you help this space grow and motivate me to bring you more and more exciting stories. The clock was striking almost 10 at night when Sofia Morales, 28 years old, finished cleaning the last event hall of the luxurious Whitmore Hotel. In Charleston, her small, calloused hands gripped the damp cloth tightly as she wiped over the cold marble, which reflected the soft lighting from the antique chandeliers. Her simple and discreet dark blue uniform already showed signs of wear, just like she did. Wrinkled, stained with cleaning products, clinging to her body from the moisture and the sweat accumulated during 12 uninterrupted hours of work. Next, to her, Miguel, her 7-year-old son, was asleep curled up on a beige leather armchair, discreetly hidden in a corner of the hall. The boy, with his slightly wavy brown hair, was resting while hugging his old teddy bear, as his worried mother did everything she could to finish the job quickly without anyone noticing his presence. Sofia looked at her son and, feeling her chest tighten with both guilt and tenderness, began to quietly hum a lullaby she had been singing ever since Miguel was just a baby. Her voice, soft and melancholic, filled the silent space of the hall, creating an unexpectedly cozy atmosphere in that otherwise opulent and impersonal place. On the other side, almost invisible, a tall and well-dressed man was observing the scene. Ethan Whitmore, 35 years old, had just left a meeting with investors on the hotel terrace and was crossing the hall when that melody in Spanish made him stop. His cold blue-gray eyes, accustomed to contracts and figures, suddenly fixed on that petite woman with light brown skin and long dark brown hair, tied up in a rushed bun, singing to a sleeping child as if the outside world did not exist. He remained still for a few seconds, observing each of her delicate movements, the way she tilted her head, how she adjusted the blanket over the boy, how she gave a faint smile, a mixture of sadness and love. Sofia, sensing she was being watched, slowly raised her face, and upon noticing the imposing figure of the man standing a few meters away, her honey-colored eyes met his. Her heart raced. She had never been so close to Ethan Whitmore before, the heir to the largest network of historic hotels in the South, a man known in the city not only for his fortune, but also for his coldness and distance. Ethan, in turn, couldn't look away. There was something about that woman, maybe the serenity with which she cared for her son, even in exhaustion, or the simple beauty hidden under the plain uniform, that made him lose his usual composure for a moment. Sofia stood frozen, still, holding the cloth in her hands, unsure whether she should apologize or simply run away from there. The silence between them was broken only by the distant sound of the rain starting to fall outside. Ethan broke the silence with a slight nod, as if trying to hide his surprise. "Sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." Sofia shook her head, speechless, and looked away, embarrassed. She quickly gathered the cleaning products, adjusted the coat over Miguel, and hurried to leave, gently pulling the still sleeping boy by the hand. Ethan followed her with his eyes until she disappeared through the side door. He stayed there alone for a few minutes, taking a deep breath, as if trying to understand exactly what he had just felt. At that moment, without either of them realizing it, a silent spark had been lit. One that would slowly burn until it turned into something that would forever change both of their lives. As she left the hall, Sofia held Miguel close to her chest and with a choked voice whispered, "Just one more day, my love. Just one more." And as she walked through the silent corridors of the hotel, she had no idea that that brief encounter, that glance exchanged in the middle of the night, would be the beginning of a love as unlikely as it was inevitable. Sofia pressed Miguel against Her chest, feeling the light warmth of her son's body who, even asleep, clutched the old brown teddy bear tightly in his arms. The soft lights of the corridor created long shadows on the marble floor, while the sound of the rain, now stronger, beat rhythmically against the hotel's tall windows. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling that she had done something wrong. Her heart was still racing from the glance she had just exchanged with that imposing man in his impeccable dark suit, who seemed to belong to another world, a world where she would never be welcome. As she approached the service elevator, Sofia stopped for a second, adjusted the blanket over Miguel better, and, without realizing it, her eyes filled with restrained tears. She wasn't crying out of weakness, but from the accumulated exhaustion of someone who fought day after day, without even having the right to dream. Meanwhile, Ethan remained standing at the center of the empty hall, his hands in his jacket and pockets and his eyes fixed on the door where Sofia had exited. The sound of her voice. His voice still echoed softly in his mind. He couldn't understand why, but that melody, those words in Spanish, had pierced through an armor he believed to be unbreakable. Who was she, he thought, as he ran his hand through his dark blonde hair, still damp from the drizzle that had started to fall. He who always avoided attachments, who maintained superficial relationships with women of his own class, now found himself standing there, alone, his chest tight with a strange feeling, familiar and at the same time frightening. On the other side, in the cramped and old elevator, Sofia looked at the worn reflection in the mirror, seeing her own image. The wrinkled uniform, her slightly sweaty face, the dark circles marked by the exhausting routine. And, for the first time in a long while, she noticed that she was blushing. "Why did he look at me like that?" she murmured to herself, running her fingers through the loose strands of hair falling over her forehead. Her body was still tingling with the memory of that man's steady yet curious gaze. When the elevator stopped in the basement, she held Miguel more tightly and made her way to the small back exit, feeling the cold, damp night air fill her chest. She looked up at the dark sky, took a deep breath and whispered, "Just one more day. I can handle it." But even as she repeated that survival promise to herself, she couldn't shake the strange, unsettling feeling that his gaze had left behind. Up on the hotel's penthouse, Ethan made his way to the empty bar, ordered a whiskey, and, without realizing it, stood staring out the wide window overlooking the garden. And down below, far in the distance, he saw Sofia exiting through the side door, holding her son in her arms, walking along the wet sidewalk under the light rain. For a moment, he considered going down, saying something, but cold and relentless reason stopped him. "Don't be foolish," he told himself, taking a sip of the whiskey, trying to erase that image from his mind. But he failed. As Sofia disappeared into the night, walking briskly, and Ethan remained there motionless, his gaze lost, a silent certainty settled for both of them. That first look had ignited a flame impossible to extinguish, and it would be only the beginning. The imaginary camera of the scene slowly pulls away as the rain intensifies, covering the city in a melancholic mist, and leaving in the air the question that lingers: how far would that look take them? The next morning, Sofia arrived at the Whitmore Hotel earlier than usual. Her eyes still bore the marks of a sleepless night and the weight of that exchanged look from the night before. As she adjusted her dark blue uniform, wrinkled from daily use, she repeated in her mind that she needed to focus on her work, that she couldn't afford to be distracted. She grabbed the cleaning cart, took a deep breath, and discreetly entered the sumptuous corridors where she would never be invited to stay as a guest. That same day, in the hotel's grand ballroom, preparations were underway for a gala event, organized for the investors and members of Charleston's high society. The setting was worthy of magazine covers, French crystal chandeliers, hand-embroidered tapestries, tables impeccably set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Guests paraded in silk dresses, tuxedos, and jewelry that sparkled under the warm lights. Sofia had been instructed by the department manager, Deborah, a tall blonde woman with firm heels and cold eyes, to discreetly handle the cleaning of the ballroom bathrooms without being noticed. "You go in, clean, and get out. No wandering where you shouldn't, understood?" she ordered, in that tone that didn't ask, but commanded. Sofia nodded submissively and pushed the cart inside. As she went about her task, trying to be as invisible as possible, the sounds of classical music and elegant laughter reverberated through the walls. Miguel was at home with a neighbor and, for the first time in weeks, Sofia didn't have to look over her shoulder in fear. She focused only on finishing quickly, but as she left the bathroom, carrying the bucket and mop with her gloves still on, Sofia, distracted by her haste, pushed the wrong door and, without realizing it, emerged right in the middle of the gala ballroom. The sound of the mop hitting the floor echoed like thunder amid the muffled conversations. Suddenly, all eyes turned to her. A small woman with light brown skin, wearing a worn-out uniform, holding a plastic bucket, with a look of growing panic. The ballroom's golden light seemed to intensify her vulnerability. For a second time, stood still. Sofia froze, her eyes wide, her breath caught. She tried to step back, but her feet wouldn't obey. The first laughs began, muffled and cruel, like stabs. Some women in long dresses whispered and cast looks of disdain, while well-dressed men smiled with contempt. One of them, bolder, blurted out, "Looks like the cleaning comes with a show today." Sofia felt her face burn. She wanted to disappear. Suddenly, Deborah appeared from the other side of the ballroom, walking briskly toward where Sofia was frozen. She grabbed her firmly by the arm and, with a fake smile for the guests, whispered through clenched teeth, "What a disgrace. What do you think you're doing? Get out of here now before you cause even more embarrassment." Sofia tried to explain, but her voice failed. I just... Shut up!" Deborah cut her off, pulling her roughly to the corner, away from the stairs, as if she were trash to be discarded. On the other side of the ballroom near the bar, Ethan watched everything. He was talking with an investor, his gaze partially distracted until he saw the scene. As soon as he recognized Sofia, his chest tightened. His heart raced when he saw the pure embarrassment on her face, the restrained tears, the desperate effort to maintain her dignity. For a second, Ethan considered stepping in, defending her, confronting Deborah, silencing the cruel laughter that echoed through the ballroom. But reason held him back. The ballroom was full of partners, investors, journalists. A scandal at that moment could jeopardize important deals for the hotel chain. He remained still, his fists clenched, struggling against his own cowardice. Sofia then pulled herself free from Deborah's grip, looked around one last time, realizing that all eyes were still on her, and ran to the back, holding the bucket and the mop tightly, as if they were fragile shields. As soon as she passed through the service door, she let the bucket fall to the floor, leaned against the cold hallway wall, and finally let the tears flow, silent and heavy. Inside, the music and the laughter soon resumed, as if nothing had happened. Ethan, however, couldn't hear anything anymore. He stood there with a champagne glass in hand, staring at the door through which she had left, with a lump in his throat he couldn't quite name. "Why didn't I do anything?" he asked himself. Angrily, that night as the event continued, he kept the usual cold, impassive mask, greeted the guests, smiled for the photos. But inside, he could only think of the woman in the blue uniform, with honey-colored eyes full of shame and pain, crossing that ballroom as someone pushed out of a world she would never be allowed to belong to. And when he got home, late at night, as he loosened his tie in front of the mirror, he murmured to himself, "I should have done something." And for the first time in a long while, he couldn't sleep. The image of her standing there, vulnerable and strong at the same time, kept replaying in his mind like a movie. And, without realizing it, Ethan was already completely involved. The silence of the night seemed to ask, would he ever have the courage to cross that gap between them? The days that followed that night of humiliation were long and silent for Sofia. She avoided the main halls, did her work as discreetly as possible, and whenever she could, she took Miguel to play in the hotel's private gardens, away from cruel stares. The boy loved that space, with its flower beds and old trees that created welcoming shadows, like a secret refuge amid the luxury that didn't belong to them. That afternoon, Charleston's sky was clear, and a light breeze rustled the magnolia leaves. Sofia, sitting on one of the stone benches, watched Miguel running barefoot across the grass, holding the old teddy bear tightly under his arm. Her smile as she watched him free and happy hid, for a moment, the weight she carried in her chest. The constant worry about bills, the fear of being caught bringing her son to work, and above all, that strange memory of Ethan's gaze. A look she tried to push from her mind, but that insisted on returning. I can't fool myself, she murmured to herself while fixing her long hair tied up in a simple bun. Miguel, distracted, ran toward the large fig tree at the center of the garden. As he tried to jump over a thick root, he tripped and got his foot stuck tightly between the exposed roots. His cry broke the afternoon silence, a sharp scream of pain and fright. "Mom! Mom!" Miguel screamed, trying to free himself in vain. Sofia jumped up, but before she could reach him, a figure suddenly appeared from the other side of the garden. Ethan Whitmore, who was walking distractedly with his phone in hand, heard the cry and instinctively ran to the boy. "Easy, kid. It's going to be all right," Ethan said with a firm yet surprisingly gentle voice as he knelt beside Miguel. Carefully, he moved the branches aside and freed the small foot, checking to see if there was any injury. Miguel sobbed, clutching the teddy bear, his eyes full of tears. "Nothing's broken. It was just a scare," he reassured, running his hand through the boy's brown hair. When Sofia approached breathless, she saw the scene and froze. Ethan, kneeling beside her son, holding him so gently with that look of someone who truly cared. I'm sorry," Sofia exclaimed, rushing to pick Miguel up. He shouldn't be here. I know it's forbidden to bring children." Ethan slowly stood up, wiping his hands on his light dress pants, and looked at her with an expression Sofia had never seen before. There was no judgment, no coldness, only sincere, disarmed tenderness. "No," he said, shaking his head softly. "Never apologize for loving your son." Those words, so simple yet so profound, hit Sofia like an unexpected wave. She felt her eyes sting, her chest tighten. For a moment she wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words got lost. She just held Miguel tighter, as if wanting to protect him from the world, but also from herself, from what she was silently starting to feel. Ethan, without really knowing why, reached out and lightly touched Sofia's arm, as if wanting to make sure she was all right. She felt the warmth of that touch, so subtle yet so full of meaning, and instinctively lifted her eyes to him. Their eyes met again, and this time there was no rush, no witnesses, no masks. For a few seconds they stayed like that. She, with her hair loosened by the breeze, her simple uniform, and her son in her arms. He standing upright, his gaze steady but vulnerable, like someone who had just found something he didn't even know he was looking for. "Thank you," Sofia managed to say in a faint voice. Ethan smiled, that rare kind of smile, not meant to impress but only to express what words cannot contain. Then he adjusted his tie, gave one last look at Miguel, who had already stopped crying and was nestled in his mother's arms, and walked away, slowly moving through the garden without looking back. Sofia remained there, sitting on the edge of the stone bench, holding her son and watching that figure disappear among the trees and old columns of the hotel. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to echo in the silent afternoon. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, like someone trying to hold back a feeling she knew was impossible, but inevitable. And at that moment, a subtle certainty crept inside her. That man had crossed a boundary, and maybe he would never leave her life again. The wind blew stronger, scattering dry leaves across the lawn, while the sky, once clear, began to turn a melancholic golden hue, like a silent omen of what was yet to come. Sofia stayed there on the stone bench for long minutes, breathing in the sweet scent of magnolias mixed with the warmth of Miguel's small body, asleep in her arms. Ethan's words still echoed in her mind. Never apologize. A man like him, so far above everything she knew, had stopped to comfort her, to look at her. That disoriented her, but at the same time, it awakened something dormant within her. In the days that followed, something changed in a way that was imperceptible, but real. Ethan began to show up with unusual frequency in the gardens where he and knew Sofia usually took Miguel to play, even after her shifts. At first, the visits seemed casual, but soon they revealed themselves to be intentional, though discreet. One sunny afternoon, while Sofia watched Miguel chasing butterflies across the lawn, Ethan appeared with 2 cups of coffee, walking calmly toward her. He was wearing a flawless white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and carried that effortless, elegant air that seemed natural to him, but completely foreign to the world Sofia knew. "Would you like one?" he asked, extending one of the cups. Sofia hesitated for a second, looking at his steady hands holding the paper cup, and then replied with a shy smile, "Thank you, but you didn't have to." Ethan sat beside her on the bench, leaving a respectful space, but close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his woody cologne. He watched Miguel in the distance and commented, "He really likes these flowers, the dahlias especially." Sofia laughed, surprised. "You noticed?" Ethan smiled slightly, looking at her with that gaze that seemed to cut through all barriers. "I noticed." From that day on, their encounters became routine. Ethan always found a pretext: a coffee, a compliment about the garden, a question about Miguel. Sofia, once always reserved and guarded, began to relax, to smile more, to speak more slowly, less defensively. One morning, while Miguel drew with sticks in the dirt, Ethan asked curiously, "You like poetry, don't you?" Sofia looked up, surprised, as if that question was too intimate for someone who didn't really know her. How do you know?" Ethan smiled, leaning slightly forward, as if sharing a secret. "I heard you singing that day, and then another time I saw you reading something. It looked like Neruda." Sofia smiled, embarrassed. "Yes, since I was a girl. I always dreamed, one day, of opening a coffee shop where I could have books, flowers, and maybe poetry for anyone who wanted to listen." Ethan stayed silent for a few seconds, taking in that confession. Then he said, "It's a beautiful dream." Sofia lowered her gaze, clasping her hands together as if unwilling to admit that she had dreams. "But dreams aren't always for people like me." Ethan furrowed his brow but didn't reply. He just stayed there, looking at her, like someone preserving the image forever. In the days that followed, he began bringing her small books, discreetly wrapped in brown paper with simple ribbons. One was Poems by Emily Dickinson, another Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. Every time he gave her one, he simply said, "I thought you might like this." Sofia received the gifts with trembling hands, with the same surprise and delicacy as someone receiving flowers for the first time. One late afternoon, while they were having coffee together in the garden, and Miguel played at a distance, Sofia took the cup Ethan offered and accidentally their hands brushed. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but both froze for a moment, as if that contact had revealed something neither dared to name. Sofia discreetly pulled her hand back, lowering her gaze, her cheeks flushed. Ethan kept looking at her with that half smile that to an outsider might seem casual, but for him hid a silent confusion. He couldn't stay away anymore. The silence that settled between them during those daily encounters said more than any words could. Not much was needed, just presence, looks, small gestures. And little by little, that social distance, so clear between boss and employee, began to dissolve like sugar in the hot coffee they shared. That day, before they said goodbye, Ethan stood up, and as he walked away, looked one last time at Sofia and said, "If you'd like, I can bring another book tomorrow." She smiled, and for the first time replied without hesitation, "I'd like that." And she stayed there, sitting on the bench, holding the book. He'd just given her, watching Miguel play and feeling, without admitting it, that her heart was beginning to race. Not just because of the books nor the conversations, but because of the man who, little by little, silently, was invading her world. And as the sun hid behind the old trees of the garden, she closed her eyes and asked herself, without the courage to answer, does he feel it too? Autumn was quietly advancing over Charleston when, on a Friday, the sky began to darken threateningly already in the middle of the afternoon. The air grew heavier, humid, with that smell of wet earth that precedes a violent storm. Sofia, as always, had finished her shift late, after making up the rooms and organizing the laundry services. Miguel was waiting for her in the small staff cafeteria, clutching his teddy bear and his eyes sleepy. As she gathered her few belongings and prepared to leave, a thunderclap rumbled so loudly that it made the windows shake. Sofia looked out the window and saw the streets already flooded and cars passing slowly under the heavy rain that fell like curtains of water. She sighed deeply, feeling that familiar anguish. Once again, she had no transportation. The bus that would take her to the modest neighborhood where she lived had already passed, and the ride-hailing apps were down because of the storm. That's when she heard the deep, familiar voice right behind her. "You don't have a ride?" Sofia quickly turned around and found Ethan standing at the door, wearing a dark overcoat, his hair slightly damp from the rain. He held one of his car keys in his hand and looked at her with that always controlled expression, but now marked by sincere concern. Say, "Yes, but don't worry, I'll wait. Another bus will come in an hour, maybe." She lied, more out of pride than conviction. Ethan watched her for a moment and, without asking permission, grabbed the umbrella hanging on the wall. "Come on, I'll take you." Sofia hesitated, looking at Miguel, already asleep on the bench, his head resting on his backpack. "No, I don't want to bother you." Ethan stepped closer, standing just inches from her, and said firmly but gently, "It's no bother." That phrase broke down any resistance. Minutes later, they were in Ethan's car, a black SUV, comfortable, which contrasted sharply with the simplicity of Sofia's life. Miguel was in the back seat, asleep, his face serene, unaware of the silent tension filling the vehicle. The rain beat hard against the windshield, while the wipers made a rhythmic sound, creating an almost hypnotic soundtrack for the silence reigning inside. On the radio, soft instrumental jazz music filled the space, mixed with the distant sound of thunder. Ethan drove calmly, paying attention to the flooded road, but he couldn't help stealing quick glances at Sofia, sitting beside him with her, arms crossed and her gaze fixed on the window. Following the droplets that slid in twisting lines, she clutched the strap of her bag tightly, as if needing something physical to hold herself together. His subtle cologne filled the space, mixed with the scent of the car's leather, and the warmth from the heater made everything even more intimate, more dangerous. After a few minutes of silence, Ethan asked in a low voice, "Are you okay?" Sofia turned to him, forcing a smile. "Yes, thank you for everything." Ethan nodded but didn't say anything else. The silence between them was already filled with everything they didn't dare say. When they arrived in front of the small building where Sofia lived, an old structure with peeling paint, Ethan turned off the engine but made no move to open the door. The rain kept falling outside, turning the car windows into a veil that isolated them from the rest of the world. Sofia turned to him, her hands on her lap, and said, "Thank you. Really." Ethan took a deep breath, looking at her for a long moment. The dim light from the street lamp across the road lit up only part of her face, highlighting her delicate features, her vulnerable gaze, her slightly parted lips. He leaned slightly forward, as if about to say something, or maybe do something even more unthinkable. Sofia noticed the movement and for a second stayed still, her heart beating so loudly it seemed to fill the whole space around them. But when their faces were dangerously close, their breaths mingling, she composed herself, quickly looked away, opened the door and said, almost stumbling over the words, "Thank you, good night." Before Ethan could say anything, she was already out, running through the rain with Miguel in her arms, disappearing into the building's entrance. Ethan remained there, still, with his hands on the steering wheel, his chest heaving and his eyes fixed on the door where she had vanished. He ran his hands over his face, closed his eyes and murmured to himself, "What is this?" For the first time in years, he was feeling something he had long believed he had forgotten. Desire, yes. But more than that, the urge to care, to be, to stay. He sat there for a few more minutes, listening to the soft music, watching the raindrops slide down the window, until finally he started the engine and drove off slowly, as someone carrying much more than he realized. On the sidewalk, Sofia, still breathless, leaned against the building's wall, holding Miguel tightly, feeling her body tremble not because of the rain, but because of the overwhelming sensation that almost kiss left. And without the courage to admit it even to herself, she whispered, "Why do you affect me so much?" The rain kept falling, washing Charleston's streets, while both of them, in separate places, thought about the same thing. Would fate have the courage to cross their lives once again? The rain stopped that night, but the tension lingered silently through the corridors of the Whitmore Hotel. In the days following the episode in the car, Sofia kept even more to herself, avoiding any unnecessary contact, hiding behind the exhausting routines of work. What she didn't know was that behind the scenes, attentive eyes were watching her. Deborah, the cold and calculating manager, didn't fail to notice the glances that, from time to time, Ethan discreetly cast toward Sofia. Nor did she ignore the hushed rumors among the staff about the meetings in the gardens, the shared coffees, and the protection he showed toward Miguel. And on a grey Monday morning, Deborah made the decision, with the coldness that always guided her actions, to cut any possibility of scandal at the root. Sofia was called to the management office in the middle of her shift, still wearing cleaning gloves and a uniform stained with bleach. When she walked in, she found Deborah sitting at the desk, her legs crossed and a cold smile on her face. "You can sit down, Sofia," she said, pointing to the chair in front of her. Sofia obeyed, feeling her heart race without knowing exactly why. Deborah arranged the papers on the desk and, without beating around the bush, stated, "We're terminating your contract." Sofia widened her eyes, not understanding. What? Why?" Deborah crossed her arms, leaning slightly forward. "Inappropriate conduct," Sofia frowned, feeling the blood drain from her face. I don't understand." "Don't lie, Sofia. We know about your friendship with Mr. Whitmore. That's improper, inappropriate. We can't tolerate this kind of behavior here." Sofia swallowed hard, feeling the ground disappear beneath her feet. She wanted to scream, protest, but could only whisper, I never did anything wrong." Deborah let out a cynical laugh. "You don't have to. Your mere presence already causes problems. Sofia clenched the gloves in her hands, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. She wouldn't beg, not in front of her. You can go to HR and sign the papers. Today's your last day, Deborah concluded, already standing up, as if dismissing a service. Sofia left the office, as if dragging her own body. She couldn't even finish her shift. She went straight to the small locker where she kept her belongings and sat there on the cold floor, with Miguel sleeping on her lap, while she tried to understand how, suddenly, everything had collapsed. That same afternoon, without the courage to face Ethan, without even knowing how to explain, Sofia took a simple sheet of paper from the hotel's notepad and wrote, with trembling handwriting, "Thank you for seeing me, and seeing more than just a maid." She carefully folded the paper, placed it inside an envelope with no name, just the words, "For you," and left it discreetly with the receptionist, asking him to give it to Ethan as soon as he arrived. Then she packed the few things she had into 2 old suitcases, picked up Miguel in her arms, and with a broken soul, boarded the first bus to a neighboring city where maybe she could start over. Once again, hours later, Ethan arrived at the hotel, exhausted after a meeting out of town. As soon as he entered the lobby, the receptionist called him. "Mr. Whitmore, someone left this for you." Ethan took the envelope, curious, and upon recognizing the simple, delicate handwriting, felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly opened it and read the few words that seemed to scream inside his chest. "Thank you for seeing me, and seeing more than just a maid." Without thinking, he ran to the administration looking for Sofia, but found only silence and the embarrassed looks of the staff. Finally, a colleague approached, her eyes downcast, and said, She was fired today. She's already gone." Ethan stood there stunned, as if taking a punch to the stomach. "Where?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The colleague shook her head. "She didn't say. She just grabbed her things and left." Without wasting a second, Ethan ran to the parking lot, got in his car, and drove to the small building where he knew she lived. He climbed the steps 2 at a time and knocked hard on the door. "Sofia, Sofia," he called, his desperate voice echoing down the empty hallway. But there was no answer. The door was slightly ajar, letting him see the empty apartment, with the scent of recent cleaning and the marks where the few pieces of furniture had been. Ethan walked in slowly, his eyes scanning the now uninhabited space. On the floor, near the window, he found a small drawing by Miguel, a crooked little house with a smiling sun in the corner and 2 figures holding hands, clearly him and his mother. Ethan knelt down, picked up the paper, and pressed it against his chest along with the letter. He walked to the window, took a deep breath and closed his eyes, murmuring in a choked voice, "I should have done more. I should have said something." He stayed there, standing, feeling the weight of the silence, the absence, the missed opportunity. And as night fell over Charleston, Ethan understood, for the first time, what it meant to feel the emptiness of losing someone. Without ever having had the courage to hold on, Ethan remained at that window, standing still, as if waiting for time to turn back. But the empty apartment only returned the cold echo of absence. The crumpled paper with Miguel's drawing between. His fingers and Sofia's letter pressed against his chest were all that remained. There was no address, no clue, nothing that said where she might have gone. Only silence and the unbearable pain of someone who lost without even having the chance to fight. But Ethan was not a man who accepted fate quietly. The next morning, with red eyes and his tie tossed on the car seat, he went through the streets of Charleston as if chasing a ghost. He started with the obvious, visiting cafes and small restaurants in the neighborhood where she had lived, describing Sofia and Miguel to every server, every cashier, every street vendor. "She's Latina, light brown skin, brown hair. She has a small boy about 7 years old. Have you seen anyone like that?" Most of the time, he received only confused looks and disinterested denials, but he didn't give up. He stopped at churches, asked priests and parishioners. He spent entire afternoons entering community centers, schools, asking about a woman who, to him, was everything. And to the world, just one more among so many carrying children by the hand, trying to survive. Please, help me. I just need to find her. One of those mornings, standing on the sidewalk of a small market, Ethan leaned against the hood of the car, breathing deeply, feeling more vulnerable than he had ever been. The man used to negotiating million-dollar contracts, leading teams and hotels, now walked the streets with a faded photo of Sofia on his phone, like any man in love searching for what he lost. Meanwhile, Sofia was trying to start over in the neighboring city of Somerville, a smaller place with less movement and fewer memories. She had found a modest job as a waitress at a small roadside diner where she served coffee and pancakes to truck drivers and families passing by on the highway. The simple uniform hid her delicate features, and the smile she forced for customers couldn't hide the sadness in her eyes. Miguel, sitting at one of the tables, drew with colored pencils while his mother worked, as he always did, quiet, far, too mature for his age. At night, in the small boarding room where they were staying, Sofia sat on the edge of the bed and watched her son sleep. The dim light from the bedside lamp barely lit the room, but it was enough for her to see in Miguel's serene features the memory of the man she couldn't get out of her head. How many times, in that solitude, did she mentally relive the almost kiss? In the car, the exchanged glances, the warmth of his hand brushing hers, the way he said those words she would never forget. Never apologize for loving your son. But at the same time, she felt a tightness in her chest, a dull pain that made her believe it had all been a mistake, an illusion created by her own loneliness. He would never look for me, she murmured, running her fingers through her loose hair as silent tears fell, witnessed by no one. And every night, before turning off the light, she hugged Miguel tightly and, without him noticing, left a long kiss on his forehead, as if holding on to the last piece of love that life still allowed. On the other side, in Charleston, Ethan didn't stop. Every street he walked down, every park, every bus station seemed to hold Sofia's shadow, the trace of the soft perfume he would never forget. And one of those nights, alone in his hotel room, with the dark city outside the window, he stared at his own reflection in the glass and whispered, "Sofia, where are you?" And the city, immense and indifferent, did not answer. The emptiness only grew, turning that desperate search into a mission driven not by reason, but by something he finally recognized: love. And as the cold wind swept the streets and the dry leaves danced along the sidewalk, fate, silent, was preparing the next encounter without either of them being able to imagine. Time passed like a heavy fog, dragging over Ethan's days as he continued his tireless search for Sofia and Miguel. The months had transformed the initial hope into a silent determination, an intimate pact with himself. He would not give up, not while there was a chance. On a cold winter afternoon, after yet another week crossing back roads and small towns, Ethan stopped the car at a gas station along a highway cutting through South Carolina's rural region. The tank almost empty, his body exhausted, his soul even more so. Next to the station, there was a simple diner with a faded sign and flickering yellow lights, as if struggling to stay lit. Ethan parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. A thin layer of snow began to form on the hood. The radio, still on, played soft instrumental music, but he barely noticed. The emptiness, more than the fatigue, weighed on him. He decided to go in. The bell above the door made a discreet chime when he pushed the glass, bringing a bit of the cold wind with him. The place was simple, with worn red booths, scratched wooden tables, and a few scattered families dining quietly. And then, amid the muffled clatter of cutlery and distant conversations, a familiar melody emerged, coming from the small portable radio on the counter. It was a soft song in Spanish, the same one that months ago Sofia had hummed in the silent ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel, while Miguel slept on the leather armchair. Ethan stopped, his heart frozen in his chest. He slowly turned his head in the direction of the sound, and then he saw, there, with her back to him, her brown hair hastily tied in a messy bun, wearing an apron stained with coffee, was her Sofia, serving a table, holding a plate with both hands, walking with the same delicacy he had never been able to forget. The world, in that instant, seemed to hold its breath. Everything around, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the rustle of the wind against the glass, fell silent. Ethan stood still, unable to move a muscle. He just looked, as if afraid that any movement might shatter reality and wake him from a dream. Sofia set the plate on the table, adjusted the loose fringe with an automatic gesture, and turned to head back to the counter. When she felt a presence behind her, she looked up and saw him. For a second that felt like an eternity, she stood frozen, her honey-colored eyes wide, her chest rising and falling rapidly, while her hands, holding the dish towel, began to tremble. "Ethan," she whispered, not even realizing she had spoken. He then took a step forward, with that same faint smile she had so many times stored in her memory, and said with a voice filled with everything he hadn't been able to say before, "I told you, you should never have apologized." Those words broke the last barrier she had been trying uselessly to keep standing. Sofia let the dish towel fall to the floor, brought her hands to her face, and unable to hold back the tears, ran to him, wrapping him in a tight, desperate embrace. Like someone clinging to their own breath after almost drowning, Ethan held her tightly, pressing his face against her hair, breathing in that soft perfume that had haunted him so many times in his dreams. Miguel, who was at one of the tables, drawing as he always did, looked up when he heard his mother crying. As soon as he saw Ethan, he put the pencils aside and ran too, hugging his leg with the strength and trust of someone who had always known that man was part of the family, even if no one had said so. Ethan knelt down, pulling Miguel into the embrace, and stayed there with both of them, in the middle of that simple diner, while the radio kept playing the song in Spanish that months ago had ignited the first spark of it all. Sofia, between sobs and nervous laughter, tightened the embrace even more and whispered, "I thought you'd never—" Ethan interrupted her, running his hand through her hair, looking into her eyes with a tenderness almost unrecognizable. "I never stopped looking." Sofia smiled, still through tears, and for the first time in a long while felt her chest fill, not with fear, but with relief, with hope, with love. There, in that forgotten diner by the side of a road, while snow began to cover the asphalt outside, two worlds that had been separated by pain, pride, and silence finally reunited, and as they remained embraced, time, for the first time in months, seemed at last to stop. Still embraced in the middle of the simple diner, Sofia, Ethan, and Miguel stayed together, as if afraid that any movement could break that reality that had taken so much to happen. But time, slowly, resumed its course, and days later, when the emotion of the reunion began to settle, Ethan made an unexpected invitation. That late afternoon, he showed up at the little diner, with that calm smile that Sofia now recognized as the reflection of a man transformed. Miguel, excited, ran to him as soon as he saw him. "Want to go for a ride with me?" Ethan asked, looking at both Miguel and Sofia, who, even surprised, nodded with a light smile. Soon after, the three of them were by the Cooper River, where the sky was tinted with golden and orange hues, reflecting in the calm water like an immense mirror. Ethan had rented a small boat, simple but cozy, that gently rocked alongside the pier. Miguel climbed in first, thrilled with the idea of an adventure, while Sofia hesitated for a brief moment, looking at Ethan as if asking without words, "Are you sure?" Ethan simply extended his hand to her, with that silent gesture Sofia already knew well, and said softly, "Trust me." She took his hand, got on the boat, and together they sailed slowly along the river, leaving the city behind, amidst the silence broken only by the sound of the small waves against the wood. Miguel, tired from the hustle of the past few days, quickly fell asleep on one of the cushioned benches, hugging his old teddy bear. Ethan then stopped rowing and let the boat drift along the gentle current. Sofia, sitting beside him, hugged her knees, looking at the horizon, where the sun seemed to slowly hide, plunging the landscape into a soft golden light. The light breeze tousled a few loose strands of her hair, and Ethan, unable to resist, gently tucked a lock behind her ear. She smiled with a shy but happy look. Then Ethan took a deep breath, turned to face her, and with a firm but emotional voice said, "I looked for you because you taught me that love can't be bought. It's built." Sofia quickly lifted her eyes and he continued, holding one of her hands tenderly. "I don't want you to go back to working for me. I don't want you to return to that hotel or that life. I want you to live by my side." She bit her lower lip, feeling her eyes burn from the strength of those words, while he went on, gently squeezing her hand. "I want to propose something. More than sharing life, I want us to build something together. There's an old mansion near downtown, abandoned for years. I thought we could turn it into a cafe." Sofia raised her eyebrows, surprised, and he smiled, adding, "A cafe that celebrates Latin culture. Your story, your poetry, everything you are." The tears were already quietly escaping from her eyes as she shook her head in disbelief. You're serious?" she asked, her voice choked. Ethan leaned even closer, looking deeply into her eyes, and answered, "I've never been more serious in my life." Sofia let out a muffled laugh between crying and happiness, and before she could form any words, she let her heart answer for her. She leaned in slowly, bringing her face close until their lips touched in an intense, passionate kiss filled with everything that had been held back for months: the restrained desire, the silent love, the longing, the fear, the overcoming. That kiss didn't need a promise. It already was, in itself, the truest of them all. Ethan held her tightly, like someone finally finding the place where they belong. Sofia gave herself completely, like someone finally allowing herself to live. Miguel, still asleep, breathed peacefully, lulled by the gentle rocking of the boat, while the two of them, in that sunset by the Cooper River, sealed not just a reunion, but the beginning of a future that not long ago they both thought impossible. The sun then disappeared completely, leaving only a faint line of light on the horizon, like a silent blessing over that new story that was finally beginning to be written. The sun had disappeared completely behind the horizon when Ethan and Sofia, still on the boat, sealed that silent promise of a future together. And as if the universe conspired in their favor, the months that followed were marked by a different rhythm, a time not of rushing, but of building. Days of hard work, nights of planning, and above all, of companionship. Little by little, the old mansion, abandoned for years in the historic center of Charleston, came back to life. The worn walls were painted with new colors, framed Spanish poetry was hung up, flower vases filled the corners, and in the center of it all, a rustic wooden counter, where Sofia served coffee with that same sweet smile that months before She could barely find within herself. The name chosen for the space was Café Esperanza, and there couldn't have been a better one. The cafe became a cozy refuge, a meeting point where curious tourists and local residents mingled to enjoy live Latin music, savor traditional sweets, and get lost in long, unhurried conversations. Sofia, now more confident, walked among the tables with ease, wearing floral aprons, and always accompanied by Miguel, who loved helping his mother by taking menus to customers and receiving affectionate smiles from those who already considered him part of the soul of the cafe. Ethan, in turn, traded his suit and tie for light shirts, comfortable pants, and whenever he could, stayed behind the counter with Sofia, learning to make coffee the way she liked it. Strong, with a touch of cinnamon and a pinch of sweetness. One of those afternoons, as they were closing up after another busy day, Sofia looked around and took a deep breath, her eyes brimming, but now with happiness. "I never imagined," she said, running her fingers along the edge of the counter, as if still unable to believe that this dream was real. Ethan approached, wrapped his arms around her waist and whispered, resting his chin on her shoulder, "You deserved this. You always did." Miguel, laughing, ran through the empty cafe, playing with a paper airplane, while the last ray of sun shone through the window, bathing everything in a soft golden light. Sofia then turned to Ethan, held his hands in hers, and looking deeply into his eyes, spoke with a voice full of emotion. "You could have chosen anything, anyone, but you chose me." Ethan smiled, squeezing her hands even tighter. "Because you're everything. I didn't even know I needed." Sofia closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, looked at Miguel running happily, and then at the illuminated sign on the cafe's front. In a whisper, as if revealing to the world the most valuable lesson she had learned, she said, "He had everything, and chose me. I had nothing, and chose to believe. Love isn't about what you have, but about who you decide to be, for the one you love." Ethan held her hand tightly, kissed her forehead tenderly, while Miguel in the background let out pure laughter, playing among the tables. The imaginary camera slowly pulls away, capturing that perfect moment. Sofia and Ethan embracing, Miguel happily playing, the Café Esperanza sign softly glowing at the entrance, and above all, the sky painted with warm tones, where the sun slowly bid farewell over Charleston. And, in that frame, without words, but with all the answers, life went on, not perfect but real, built with presence, affection, and choice. The choice to love and to stay. So, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I really want to know. Don't forget to like if you enjoyed it. Share it with someone who loves emotional stories, and subscribe to the channel to follow all the upcoming ones. Before you go, I've picked out another touching story that will move your heart even more.